In the grand palaces of the galaxy, power is everything. Armies are commanded, worlds are conquered, and destinies are decided by the cold, hard logic of kings and queens. But what if the greatest power in the universe isn't a crown, or a starship, or a weapon? What if the key to calming the most terrifying force in the galaxy was not a show of strength, but a simple act of kindness from the most insignificant man in the palace? This is the story of a janitor, two impossible children, and a lullaby that changed an empire. The Grand Palace of Xylos breathed around Leo. It was a living, breathing entity of crystal and light, a testament to an empire so ancient its history was measured in geological epochs. But for Leo, it was just a place of quiet, unending work. As a janitor on the night shift, he was a ghost in this magnificent machine, a silent witness to its slumber. His world was the soft, rhythmic swish of his electro-broom across the polished obsidian floors, the faint scent of ozone from the ion scrubbers, and the profound, star-dusted silence of the royal corridors after midnight. He was an invisible man in a palace of unforgettable beings. His life hadn't always been a study in silence. There were echoes of another life, a life on a vibrant, noisy earth where he had been a teacher, his days filled with the chaotic, beautiful sound of children's laughter. But a quiet, personal tragedy had shattered that world, leaving behind a profound emptiness that he had sought to fill with the vast, uncaring emptiness of space. He had come to the imperial palace seeking not promotion or wealth, but anonymity. He wanted a simple, predictable existence, a life measured in clean floors and completed shifts. Here, amidst the grandeur and the power, he was simply the human janitor, a curiosity to some, and completely invisible to most. He preferred it that way. The silence was a balm, a shield against the memories that still haunted his dreams. He found a quiet, meditative rhythm in his work. He didn't just clean, he cared. He would notice a flickering light panel in a forgotten hallway and log it for the maintenance droids. He would find a lost child's toy, a small, multifaceted crystal, and place it gently on a guard post where it might be found. These were the small, unseen acts that defined his existence, a quiet rebellion of care in a world of cold, hierarchical duty. He knew his place. He was the lowest-ranking sentient being in the entire palace, a fact that brought him a strange sense of freedom. No one expected anything of him beyond a clean floor. Tonight, as he guided his broom down the long, echoing sweep of the Hall of Ancestors, the silence felt different. It was heavier, charged with a tension that seemed to seep from the very walls. The palace was on edge. He knew the reason, of course. Everyone knew. It was the matter of the royal twins. He had never seen them, but he had heard the whispers, the fearful hushed conversations between the royal guards and the serving staff. He knew another Nanny, a highly decorated telepath from a prestigious off-world academy, had fled the palace in terror just that morning. She was the 7th in as many months. The whispers painted a picture of two beautiful, terrifying, and utterly impossible children. And tonight, as he moved closer to the sealed, ornate doors of the royal nursery, he wondered what kind of sorrow could be so powerful that it could break the minds of the galaxy's best caregivers. The legend of the royal twins was the most whispered and most feared topic in the Grand Palace of Xylos. They were phantoms, spoken of in hushed tones in the kitchens and the barracks, their story a chilling cautionary tale for new recruits. Leo had never laid eyes on them, but he knew their reputation intimately. He had seen the aftermath. He had seen a distinguished cybernetically enhanced nanny from the Rigel system, a specialist in xenopediatrics, sprint shrieking down the royal corridor, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror, leaving a trail of sparking, short-circuited cybernetics in her wake. He had cleaned the strange crystalline frost that had inexplicably coated the walls of the nursery after another nanny had fled, a frost that hummed with a low, mournful energy. The stories were as varied as they were terrifying. The twins, Prince Kale and Princess Lyra, were said to be cursed, or perhaps blessed, with a power that no one understood. The kitchen staff whispered that they could make food rot with a single angry glance. The guards spoke of toys levitating in the air, forming complex, impossible geometric patterns before exploding into dust. The diplomats, in their rare unguarded moments, spoke of a psychic dissonance, an uncontrollable emotional broadcast that could induce vertigo, nausea, and profound existential dread in anyone who came too close. They were, as one terrified gardener had put it, little monsters wrapped in silk and starlight. No one, Not the most patient caregivers, not the most advanced calming droids, not even their own mother, the Empress, could soothe them. This morning the chaos had been worse than usual. A Xylostian nanny, a being known for her species' unshakable calm and empathic abilities, had been the latest casualty. She hadn't even screamed, she had simply walked out of the nursery, her multifaceted eyes completely blank, and had continued walking until she had stepped into one of the palace's decorative fountains, where she stood, catatonic, until the guards had gently led her away. The palace was on high alert. The Empress was furious, not at the children, but at the universe, at the endless parade of experts who promised solutions and delivered only failure. Leo felt a pang of sympathy, not for the Empress, but for the two small misunderstood beings who were the source of so much fear. He couldn't imagine a lonelier existence. He kept his head down, focusing on the familiar rhythmic swish of his broom, a sound that had become the soundtrack to his quiet, invisible life. He cleaned the corridor that led to the royal nursery last, as he always did. It was the quietest part of the palace, a place no one willingly lingered. But tonight, as he approached the great ornate doors, the silence was different. It wasn't the usual heavy, expectant silence that preceded a storm. It was the silence after the storm. He could feel it, a profound, gut-wrenching sadness that seemed to seep through the thick carved doors. And beneath that sadness, almost too quiet to hear, was another sound. It was not a roar of psychic power or the crash of levitating objects. It was the simple, heartbreaking, and utterly universal sound of two small children crying their hearts out in the dark. The sound was a soft, almost melodic counterpoint to the palace's deep, humming silence. It was a sound of pure, undiluted sorrow, a harmony of two small voices intertwined in a shared grief. It was not the angry, frustrated cry of a tantrum, but the deep, wounded sob of a profound and inconsolable loneliness. All the stories, all the fearful whispers of psychic monsters and uncontrollable power evaporated from Leo's mind. In that moment, through the thick, carved wood of the nursery door, he didn't hear a threat. He heard a tragedy. He heard two children who were in pain. His own past, the one he had tried so hard to bury, stirred within him, a faint, echoing memory of another child's tears in a quiet, sterile hospital room, a pain he had been powerless to soothe. He found himself moving, not as a janitor, but as the teacher he once was. His feet carried him silently to the nursery door. He knew he shouldn't be there. This corridor was the domain of the royal guard, a place where a low-level human janitor had no business lingering. Every rule, every instinct for self-preservation he had cultivated screamed at him to turn around, to walk away, to pretend he hadn't heard anything. But the sound of their weeping was a hook in his heart, a quiet, insistent pull he could not ignore. He leaned his head against the cool, smooth surface of the door, closing his eyes. He tried to imagine what it must be like for them, to be so powerful yet so alone, to have your every emotion manifest as a terrifying, uncontrollable force that pushed everyone away. He raised his hand, his fingers hovering just inches from the door's ornate handle. He could try to go in. He could try to offer comfort. But he had seen what had happened to the others, the experts, the ones who were trained for this. He was just a janitor. What could he possibly do? The image of the last nanny, standing catatonic in the fountain, flashed in his mind. But then another image followed, the two small alien children, huddled together in the darkness, their only company, their shared, overwhelming sadness. They weren't monsters, they were just children, children who had been failed by everyone. In that moment, a choice was made. It wasn't a grand, heroic decision. It was a small, quiet, and deeply human one. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't interfere directly, but he wouldn't do nothing. He remembered something from his past, a simple tool he had used to calm a classroom of frightened children during a thunderstorm on Earth, a tool that had nothing to do with psychic abilities or advanced technology. It was just a simple human secret. He looked up and down the empty, silent corridor. No one was watching. No one ever was. He slowly, quietly lowered himself to the floor, his back resting against the cold, unyielding wood of the nursery door. He was a universe away from them, separated by a barrier of wood and royal protocol. But he was there, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The night was a vast silent ocean, and Leo sat at its shore, a lone still figure in the grand empty corridor. He didn't try to open the door, he didn't speak, he simply sat, his back a warm solid presence against the cold ornate wood. Inside, the soft heartbroken sobs continued, a mournful rhythmic pulse of sorrow. Leo reached into the inner pocket of his worn janitor's tunic, his fingers closing around a small, smooth metallic object. It was an old tarnished harmonica, a relic from his past life, a simple instrument he hadn't played in years. He had kept it, not as a source of joy, but as a tangible link to a time before the silence had taken over his world. He brought the harmonica to his lips, the cool metal a familiar forgotten comfort. He hesitated for a moment, the silence of the palace pressing in on him. This was a foolish, reckless act. If he was discovered, he would be dismissed without a second thought. But then he heard a particularly sharp, piercing cry from within the nursery, a sound of pure, undiluted pain, and his hesitation vanished. He took a soft, slow breath and began to play. The melody that emerged was not complex or masterful. It was a simple, ancient human lullaby, a tune his own grandmother used to hum to him on stormy nights. The notes were soft, gentle, and filled with a profound, quiet melancholy. They were notes of comfort, of reassurance, of a shared unspoken understanding that the night was dark, but that dawn would eventually come. Inside the nursery, the chaotic swirling energies that had been lashing out at the walls began to subside. The two small royal children, huddled together on a large silken bed, slowly stopped crying. Their large luminous eyes, which had been squeezed shut in an agony of emotion, slowly opened. They looked around the room, then at each other, their small pointed ears twitching at the strange new sound that was seeping through the door. It was unlike anything they had ever heard. It wasn't the sterile, calculated calming frequencies the droids used, nor was it the invasive, probing telepathy of the nannies. This was something else. It was warm, it was gentle, and it was sad. But it was a sadness that didn't hurt. It was a sadness that seemed to understand their own. Leo continued to play, his eyes closed, pouring all of his own forgotten grief, his own deep loneliness, into the simple, haunting melody. He wasn't trying to control them. He wasn't trying to fix them. He was simply sharing his own quiet sorrow, offering it up as a silent gesture of solidarity. He was saying without words, "I know what it feels like to be alone in the dark." Outside, the music echoed softly in the vast empty corridor, a single fragile thread of human empathy in a world of alien grandeur. Inside, the two most powerful and most feared children in the galaxy lay in a profound listening silence, their own psychic storm finally, miraculously stilled. Leo played until his own breath grew tired, until the final soft note faded into the palace's ever-present hum. The crying had stopped. For the first time that night, the nursery was completely silent. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of despair, but a calm, peaceful quiet, like the air after a long-awaited rain. Leo remained seated for a few moments, the harmonica still warm in his hands, listening. He heard nothing. No crying, no crashing, no psychic hum of distress. He had done all he could. With a quiet sigh, he pushed himself to his feet, tucked the harmonica back into his pocket, and continued his cleaning route, the soft swish of his broom the only sound in the now tranquil corridor. He didn't know if he had truly helped, or if it had just been a coincidence, but he felt a small, unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a flicker of the purpose he thought he had lost forever. This became his new, secret ritual. Every night, after completing his other duties, Leo would make his way to the royal corridor. He would listen at the nursery door. If he heard the telltale signs of distress, the soft sobs, the low hum of agitated psychic energy, he would sit down, his back against the door, and play. Sometimes he played the harmonica. Other nights, when he felt the sorrow was deeper, he would hum a low, simple lullaby, his voice a quiet bass rumble that was more a vibration than a sound. He never tried to enter. He never spoke a word. He simply offered his quiet musical presence, a silent guardian against their nightly storms of grief. And every time, without fail, the crying would stop, and a profound, peaceful silence would fall over the nursery. He was their ghost, their unseen, unknown comforter. The days turned into weeks, and the change in the royal nursery did not go unnoticed. The palace staff whispered in confusion. The psychic storms that had once been a nightly terror had ceased. The royal twins were still reclusive, still unapproachable, but the destructive, violent outbursts had vanished. The nannies who had been on standby were dismissed, no longer needed. The royal counselors attributed the change to a natural maturation of the twins' psychic abilities, a self-correction that their advanced species was capable of. They filed reports, closed the case, and moved on to other, more pressing matters of state. No one thought to question the quiet human janitor, who now spent a little extra time cleaning the corridor outside the nursery each night. But one person did notice, one person who had access to every security feed, every sensor log in the entire palace, saw what no one else did. Empress Seraphina, the ruler of the Xylos Empire, a woman whose public image was one of cold, untouchable authority, spent her lonely nights doing what she could no longer do in person, watching over her children. She had tried everything. She had hired the best minds in the galaxy, spent fortunes on calming technologies, and had faced nothing but failure. Her heart ached with a mixture of love, fear, and a profound sense of helplessness. And then she saw him. On the security logs, she saw the simple human janitor. She saw him sit, night after night. She saw him play his strange primitive instrument. And she saw, on the internal atmospheric and psionic sensors, the immediate, miraculous calming effect his simple melodies had on her children. She watched, her own heart a whirlwind of disbelief, confusion, and a tiny fragile flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Empress Seraphina was a creature of logic and power. Her entire life had been a series of calculated decisions, strategic alliances, and the cold, hard execution of imperial will. She did not believe in miracles. She believed in data, and the data she was seeing was an impossibility, a paradox that defied every known law of xenopsychology. The galaxy's most renowned telepaths, armed with technology that could soothe the minds of leviathans, had fled in terror from her children. Yet, a low-tier, non-telepathic janitor from a primitive, newly contacted species was achieving a state of perfect calm with nothing more than a series of harmonized atmospheric vibrations produced by a simple metal reed. It made no sense. It was an anomaly, a variable that her vast intellect could not compute. For 3 nights she did nothing but watch. She replayed the security logs, cross-referencing the audio from the corridor with the psionic and atmospheric readings from inside the nursery. The correlation was undeniable. The moment the human's music began, the chaotic high-frequency psionic waves generated by the twins would begin to stabilize, their jagged peaks softening into gentle, rolling hills. The localized drop in ambient temperature that always accompanied their distress would reverse, returning to a comfortable equilibrium. It was a perfect one-to-one relationship. The human's music was not just a distraction, it was somehow a cure. The Empress, a being who commanded fleets and decided the fate of worlds, found herself utterly fascinated by the quiet, unassuming actions of a single insignificant man. She analyzed his file. Leo, designation Janitor, Class 3. A refugee from a planetary tragedy on Earth. Former educator. No criminal record. No political affiliations. His psychological profile was unremarkable. He was by all galactic standards a background character, a ghost in the grand machine of her palace. Yet this ghost was succeeding where kings and scientists had failed. On the 4th night, her curiosity and desperation finally outweighed her royal protocol. She watched the security feed as Leo approached the nursery door, listened for a moment, and then, hearing the faint familiar sounds of her children's sorrow, sat down in his usual spot. He brought the harmonica to his lips, but before he could play the first note, a soft electronic chime echoed in the corridor. The ornate door to the royal nursery hissed open. Leo froze, the harmonica halfway to his mouth, his heart leaping into his throat. He was caught. He expected the Imperial Guard. He expected to be arrested, interrogated, and likely exiled from the system for his unimaginable presumption. Instead, he saw her. Empress Seraphina stood in the doorway, her tall, regal form silhouetted against the soft light of the nursery. She was not wearing her crown or her ceremonial robes, but a simple dark gown. Her expression was not one of anger, but of a deep, profound, and almost clinical curiosity. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the booming command of an empress, but a quiet, almost hesitant question, translated through a small, unseen device. "What is that?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the small metallic harmonica in his hand. Leo, utterly speechless, simply stared back at the most powerful woman in the galaxy, his secret ritual now exposed under her intense analytical gaze. The security footage was a paradox, a digital ghost that haunted the Empress's private chambers. On one screen, she saw the galaxy's most renowned child psychologists, their faces masks of strained concentration, attempting to breach the psychic maelstrom of the nursery, only to recoil in terror or collapse into a catatonic state. On another, she saw a simple human janitor, his back against a door, his eyes closed, producing a series of gentle, melancholic tones from a primitive metal instrument. And on a third screen, a cascade of data confirmed the impossible. The moment the human's music began, the chaotic high-frequency psionic waves generated by the twins would stabilize, their jagged violent peaks softening into the gentle rolling hills of a mind at peace. The localized drop in ambient temperature that always accompanied their distress would reverse, returning to a comfortable equilibrium. For 3 nights, Serafina did nothing but watch, her vast analytical mind trying to deconstruct the anomaly. The correlation was undeniable, a perfect one-to-one relationship. The human's music was not just a distraction, it was somehow a cure. She cross-referenced his species profile. Humans, a newly contacted, non-telepathic, carbon-based species. High emotional volatility, strong tribal and familial bonds, prone to irrational acts of both extreme violence and extreme altruism. There was nothing in the data that could explain his effect on her children. He was an outlier, a statistical impossibility, and the Empress, a being who commanded fleets and decided the fate of worlds, found herself utterly, completely fascinated by the quiet, unassuming actions of a single insignificant man. She analyzed his personal file. Leo, designation Janitor Class 3, a refugee from a planetary tragedy on Earth, former educator. No criminal record, no political affiliations. His psychological profile was unremarkable. He was by all galactic standards a background character, a ghost in the grand machine of her palace. Yet this ghost was succeeding where kings and scientists had failed. On the 4th night, her curiosity and desperation finally outweighed her royal protocol. She watched the main security feed as Leo approached the nursery door, listened for a moment, and then, hearing the faint familiar sounds of her children's sorrow, sat down in his usual spot. He brought the small metal object to his lips, but before he could play the first note, a soft electronic chime echoed in the corridor. The ornate door to the royal nursery hissed open. Leo froze, the harmonica halfway to his mouth, his heart leaping into his throat. He was caught. He expected the Imperial Guard. He expected to be arrested, interrogated, and likely exiled from the system for his unimaginable presumption. Instead, Empress Serafina stood in the doorway, her tall regal form silhouetted against the soft warm light of the nursery. She was not wearing her crown or her ceremonial robes, but a simple dark flowing gown. Her expression was not one of anger, but of a deep, profound, and almost clinical curiosity. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the booming amplified command of an empress, but a quiet, almost hesitant question, translated through a small unseen device. "What?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the small metallic harmonica in his hand. Leo, utterly speechless, simply stared back at the most powerful woman in the galaxy, his secret nightly ritual now exposed under her intense analytical gaze. Leo's mind went completely blank. He was kneeling on the cold, polished floor of the royal corridor, a half-raised harmonica in his hand, staring up at the Empress of the Xylos Empire. Seconds stretched into an eternity. His training, the ingrained deference of a low-tier worker, screamed at him to bow, to apologize, to explain. But his throat was dry, and his thoughts were a chaotic jumble. The Empress, for her part, simply waited, her patience a testament to her absolute authority. She did not need to command, the universe simply arranged itself around her will. Finally, Leo found his voice, a dry, cracking whisper. "It's a harmonica, Your Majesty." The name meant nothing to her, of course. He lowered it slowly, holding it out in his palm as if it were a strange alien artifact. "And its function?" Serafina asked, her gaze never leaving the small metal object. "It makes music," Leo stammered, feeling the absurdity of the conversation. "A sound. I heard the children crying. On my world sometimes a soft sound can help." The Empress considered this, her head tilting slightly. "We have employed the galaxy's finest sonic therapists. Their modulated frequencies are designed to induce a state of calm in any known sentient mind. They failed." Her statement was not an accusation, but a simple, cold statement of fact. I don't know anything about that, Your Majesty," Leo said honestly. "It's just an old song, a lullaby." It was then that one of the twins, a small, slender form with large, luminous eyes, appeared in the doorway behind the Empress. The child did not look at its mother, but stared directly at Leo and then at the harmonica in his hand. A soft, questioning trill, a sound like tiny crystalline bells, emanated from the child. Leo, acting on an instinct he didn't understand, slowly brought the harmonica back to his lips and played a single soft, sustained note. The child's tense posture immediately softened. The Empress watched this silent, bizarre exchange, her analytical mind processing the new data. "You have done this before," she stated. It was not a question. Leo swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Majesty, for a few weeks." They seemed sad. A long, heavy silence fell between them. Leo braced himself for the inevitable. He had interfered. He had crossed a line that no one in his position had any right to cross. He had treated the royal heirs, the most powerful and feared beings in the palace, as if they were nothing more than lonely, unhappy children. He had committed a crime of empathy. "The Royal Council has advised me to place them in psychic stasis until their abilities can be controlled," the Empress said, her voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "They believe the children are a danger to themselves and to the court." Leo's heart sank. Psychic stasis. It was a cold, clinical term for a living death. "They're not a danger," he heard himself say, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "They're just lonely." The Empress's gaze finally shifted from the harmonica to his face, her expression unreadable. "Show me," she said, her voice no longer a question, but a quiet, absolute command. "Do what you do." The Empress's command hung in the air, a quiet, unshakable decree. It was not a request, it was a challenge, a test. The entire weight of his future, and perhaps the future of the two small children, rested on this single, impossible moment. Leo's hands trembled slightly as he looked from the Empress's cold, analytical gaze to the small, hopeful face of the child in the doorway. He was just a janitor, a former teacher who had fled his own grief. What could he possibly offer that the galaxy's finest minds could not? He took a deep, shuddering breath, the sterile, recycled air of the palace feeling thin in his lungs, and then he simply let go. He let go of his fear, of his sense of inadequacy, of the crushing weight of royal protocol. He thought only of the sound of their weeping, of the profound shared loneliness that had first drawn him to this door. He did not stand, he did not bow. He remained on the floor, a simple, humble figure, and brought the harmonica to his lips. He closed his eyes and began to play. He played the same simple, ancient human lullaby, the melody that was soaked in the quiet grief of his own past. The notes were not perfect. They were soft, breathy, and imbued with a profound, quiet sadness. It was the sound of a heart that had been broken, and had over years of silence, slowly, imperfectly begun to heal. He wasn't performing for the Empress. He was communicating in the only language he had left, a language of pure, unadulterated emotion. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The child in the doorway, who had been standing stiffly, relaxed completely, a soft purring sound emanating from its chest. Then, the second twin appeared, drawn from the shadows of the nursery by the gentle, melancholic melody. Together, they slowly, cautiously, walked out into the corridor. They did not go to their mother. They came to Leo. With a reverence that was almost heartbreaking to witness, the two most feared beings in the palace sat down on the floor in front of the human janitor, their large, luminous eyes fixed on him, their bodies swaying gently in time with the music. A soft blue, calming light began to emanate from their skin, not the chaotic, uncontrolled energy of before, but a gentle, rhythmic, peaceful glow. Empress Serafina stood in the doorway, a silent, frozen statue, her mind struggling to process the scene before her. Her children, who had never allowed anyone within 10 feet of them without unleashing a psychic storm, were now sitting peacefully at the feet of a janitor, captivated by the sounds of a primitive metal toy. She saw no fear in them. She saw no anger. She saw only a profound sense of peace, of connection. For the first time, she was seeing her children, not as a problem to be solved, but simply as children. Leo finished the melody, the final note hanging in the air for a long moment before fading into the palace's hum. The twins did not move. They simply watched him, their expressions calm and trusting. The Empress finally found her voice, a choked, barely audible whisper. "How? They weren't looking for a master," he said softly. "They were just looking for a friend." Leo's simple, honest words hung in the air, a profound truth that cut through a lifetime of royal protocol and cold clinical analysis. They were just looking for a friend. The Empress stared at him, then at her children, who were still sitting peacefully at his feet, their luminous eyes filled with a quiet, trusting adoration. For the first time, Serafina saw the situation not through the lens of a ruler or a strategist, but through the forgotten, aching heart of a mother. She had given her children everything: the finest tutors, the most advanced technologies, the safest environment in the galaxy. Everything, except the one thing they truly needed: a simple, unconditional connection. She had been so focused on controlling their power, on managing the problem they represented, that she had forgotten to see the lonely, frightened children beneath. This human, this simple janitor with his sad, quiet music, had not tried to control them. He had simply sat with them in their darkness. He had offered his presence, his empathy, and in doing so, he had achieved what the combined might and wisdom of her empire could not. He had calmed the storm. The realization was both humiliating and deeply, profoundly humbling. With a grace that was entirely her own, the Empress slowly, deliberately lowered herself to the floor. The guards who had materialized silently in the corridor at the sight of their Empress in such a vulnerable position gasped, but a single, almost imperceptible gesture from her froze them in place. She sat there, on the cold, polished obsidian, just a few feet from Leo and her children. She was no longer the Empress of the Xylos Empire. She was just a mother, trying to find her way back to her own family. She looked at Leo, her expression a complex mixture of awe, confusion, and a deep emerging respect. "Teach me," she said, her voice a soft, quiet plea. Leo, startled by the request, looked from the Empress to the twins, then back again. "Teach you what, Your Majesty?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "This music," she said, gesturing to the harmonica he still held. "This connection." Leo understood. She wasn't just asking about the instrument. She was asking how to bridge the vast, silent chasm that had grown between her and her own children. He didn't have a grand philosophical answer. He only had the simple truth of his own experience. "You don't need to learn the music," he said softly. "You just need to be willing to sit on the floor." He offered the harmonica to her. After a moment of hesitation, the most powerful woman in the galaxy took the simple, tarnished instrument from the hand of her janitor. It was an act of surrender, of trust, and the beginning of a new, impossible alliance forged not in a treaty room, but in a silent, empty corridor in the middle of the night. The weeks that followed were a surreal, quiet revolution within the heart of the Grand Palace. By official decree, Leo the Janitor Class 3 was reassigned. His new title, a source of endless confusion and whispered gossip among the court, was Royal Play Therapist and Musical Consultant. His duties were simple. He was to spend his nights in the royal nursery. He was not to train the twins, not to study them, and certainly not to control them. His only task was to be with them, to play his music, to share his quiet, gentle presence, and to teach the Empress how to do the same. The first few sessions were awkward. The Empress, a being accustomed to commanding fleets and shaping galactic policy, found herself sitting cross-legged on the nursery floor, struggling to produce a single clear note from the simple human instrument. The twins would watch her with a curious, detached air, their psychic energies still calm, but not yet connected to her. Leo acted as the quiet, patient bridge between them. He didn't give orders, he simply created an environment of peace. He would show the Empress how to hold the harmonica, how to breathe into it not with force, but with a gentle, steady sigh. Then he would play his own melody, and the twins would turn their attention to him, their soft blue light pulsing in time with the music. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a change began to occur. The Empress stopped trying to master the instrument and started to simply listen. She listened not just to Leo's music, but to the silence that followed. She watched her children, not as dangerous sources of power, but as two small separate beings with their own quiet personalities. She noticed for the first time how Kale's light would pulse a little faster when he was curious, and how Lyra would hum a soft, almost inaudible counter-melody when Leo played his lullaby. These were tiny, intimate details that her royal tutors and psychic analysts had never seen, because they had been looking for a problem, not for a person. Leo's greatest contribution was not his music, but his simple human perspective. He introduced them to the concept of play. He brought in simple tactile toys from Earth, smooth wooden blocks, soft fabric dolls, finger paints. The twins, who had only ever been given complex educational data crystals, were initially baffled. They would levitate the blocks, trying to arrange them into complex floating geometric patterns. Leo would gently, without a word, take the blocks and simply stack them one on top of the other until they fell, then laugh. The first time he did this, the twins stared at him in confusion, but when he did it again, a strange new sound filled the nursery. It was a soft melodic trill, the Xylosian equivalent of a child's giggle. It was the first time the Empress had ever heard her children laugh. In that moment, the last wall of her imperial detachment crumbled, and she simply became a mother, watching her children discover the simple, profound joy of being a child. The sound of her children's laughter was a key to unlocking a part of Empress Serafina she had thought long dead. The weeks turned into months, and the royal nursery, once the most feared and isolated section of the palace, became its heart. The whispers of the court staff changed from fearful gossip to bewildered admiration. Stories circulated of the strange, quiet human who had tamed the little monsters, not with force or technology, but with simple games and sad, gentle music. The nursery was no longer a prison of psychic chaos. It was a sanctuary of peace, a place filled with the soft notes of a harmonica, the quiet stacking of wooden blocks, and the new, wondrous sound of children's laughter. Leo's influence extended beyond the nursery walls. He had, without ever intending to, become the Empress's most trusted and most unconventional advisor. She would often seek him out in the quiet hours of the night, not in the grand throne room, but in the simple, calm space of the nursery. She would ask him questions not about galactic policy or military strategy, but about human concepts that her vast logical mind struggled to grasp. Concepts like play, forgiveness, and unconditional love. He would explain them in his simple, honest way, often using stories from his past as a teacher on Earth. He was no longer just the janitor. He had become her window into the strange, illogical, and beautiful soul of humanity. He taught her that the twins' psychic outbursts were not a flaw to be corrected, but a language to be understood. Their power was directly tied to their emotions. When they felt safe and loved, they could create beautiful, harmless displays of light and sound. When they felt threatened or lonely, their fear would lash out, warping the space around them. The solution was not to suppress the power, but to heal the emotion. It was a simple, profoundly human perspective that had been completely overlooked by the galaxy's finest experts. The Empress, a being of immense intellect, absorbed these lessons with a fierce, newfound dedication. She was not just learning how to manage her children, she was learning how to be a mother. One evening, as Leo watched the twins use their abilities to create a slow, swirling galaxy of glowing lights in the middle of the room, Serafina sat beside him. "The Royal Council is pleased," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "They believe I have finally found a solution to the problem of the heirs." Leo looked at the laughing, playing children, then back at the Empress. "They still don't understand, do they?" he asked quietly. "They were never a problem to be solved." A faint, sad smile touched the Empress's lips. "No," she admitted. "They were not, I was." In that moment of shared, honest vulnerability, the last barrier between the janitor and the Empress dissolved. They were simply two parents, two friends, watching their children play, their quiet bond a silent testament to the strange and wonderful ways the universe could bring two lonely souls together. The transformation of the royal nursery and the Empress herself did not go unnoticed by the wider palace. What had once been a source of fear and instability was now a beacon of a strange, quiet harmony. The change was so profound, so inexplicable by conventional Xylosian logic, that it began to attract attention. Dignitaries and counselors, who had once avoided the royal corridor, now found excuses to walk past, hoping to catch a glimpse of the impossible, the cursed twins playing peacefully. Their powers no longer a weapon of chaos, but a tool of gentle creative expression. At the center of this miracle was always the same, unassuming figure, the human janitor. Leo, sitting quietly on the floor, either humming a simple tune or helping to stack colored blocks. He had become a legend in his own right, a figure of myth and whispered speculation. Some believed he was a powerful psychic in disguise, a secret agent from the human homeworld. Others whispered that he was an ancient forgotten mystic, his simple janitor's uniform a clever ruse. No one could accept the simple, unbelievable truth that he was just a kind, lonely man who had offered his friendship to two lonely children. The Empress, however, knew the truth, and she saw in it not just a solution to her personal problem, but an opportunity, a powerful new tool in her diplomatic arsenal. One evening after the twins were asleep, she summoned Leo not to the nursery, but to the Imperial Strategy Room, a vast circular chamber dominated by a colossal holographic map of the galaxy. "Leo," she began, her tone shifting from the soft maternal one he had grown used to, back to the crisp, commanding voice of an empress. "I require your unique perspective on a matter of galactic importance." She gestured to the map, where two vast swathes of territory, one colored a hostile red, the other a cool, calculating blue, were locked in a centuries-old border dispute. "The Kanthar hegemony and the Valtari Republic," she stated. "Their forever war threatens to destabilize this entire sector. We have tried everything, sanctions, treaties, third-party negotiations. Nothing works. They are locked in a cycle of hatred and retribution." Leo looked at the map, then back at her, his expression one of complete confusion. "Your Majesty, what could I possibly know about this? I'm a janitor, not a diplomat." The Empress smiled, a rare and beautiful sight. "Precisely," she said. "You do not think like a diplomat. You think like a human. You see the person, not the position. You hear the sadness, not the threat." She focused the map on a specific, contested moon, a barren rock that was, for some ancient forgotten reason, sacred to both sides. "They are about to engage in another pointless, bloody battle over this piece of rock," she said, her voice laced with weariness. "I want you to go there." Leo stared at her, speechless. "Go there, and do what? Clean their floors?" For the first time, a genuine melodic laugh escaped the Empress. "No, Leo," she said, her silver eyes shining with a brilliant, audacious idea. "I want you to go there and teach them how to play." The idea was insane. It was a diplomatic gambit so far outside the established rules of galactic negotiation that it bordered on madness. But it was a madness born of a new, human-inspired wisdom. Empress Seraphina, leveraging her immense authority, brokered a temporary fragile ceasefire. She proposed a cultural exchange on the contested moon, a final desperate attempt at peace before the inevitable slaughter. The Cathar and Valtari commanders, both intrigued and insulted by the bizarre proposal, reluctantly agreed, each suspecting a trap within a trap. Leo arrived on the barren, windswept moon not with a diplomatic entourage, but with a simple, unmarked cargo shuttle. He wore his janitor's uniform. His only equipment was a crate of simple wooden blocks, a set of brightly colored paints, and his old tarnished harmonica. The two opposing armies, hulking Cathar warriors in black armor and sleek, elegant Valtari soldiers in silver, watched from their fortified positions as the lone human set up a small, unassuming camp in the exact center of the desolate no-man's land between them. He did not raise a flag. He did not make a speech. He simply sat down and, in the profound, tense silence, began to build a simple, colorful tower with his blocks. For 2 days, he did nothing else. He built his towers, and the wind knocked them down. He hummed his sad, gentle lullabies to the empty gray sky. The soldiers from both sides watched him, their initial suspicion turning to utter, complete bewilderment. They had been prepared for a trick, a secret weapon, a diplomatic masterstroke. They were not prepared for a man who simply played. On the 3rd day, a small, curious Cathar child, the daughter of one of the commanders, wandered out from the trenches towards him. Before the guards could react, she sat down and tentatively placed one block on top of his tower. Soon a Voltari child followed. By the end of the week, the no man's land was no longer a battlefield, it was a playground. Dozens of children from both sides, whose lives had been defined by hatred and fear, were now laughing together, building colorful towers and listening to the strange, sad music of the human janitor. Their parents, the hardened soldiers, watched from the edges, their weapons lowered, their faces a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and a dawning forgotten sense of shared humanity. Empress Serafina, watching the entire scene on a secure feed from her flagship, knew she had won. Leo never became a king or a diplomat. When the peace treaty was finally signed, a treaty brokered not on threats but on the shared laughter of children, he returned to the palace. The Empress created a new permanent position for him, guardian and educator of the royal heirs. His job was not to rule, but to teach the most powerful children in the galaxy, the simple, profound, and universe-altering lessons of human empathy. And so, the janitor who had once fled his own grief, found his true calling. He did not command armies or rule empires. He did something far more important. He taught the children of the stars how to play. And in doing so, he gave the galaxy a gift it had long forgotten, the hope of a lasting and truly meaningful peace.